Call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Community Development Committee for the Metropolitan Council on June 15th, 2026. I'm Councilmember Robert Lilligan, the chair, joined by a quorum of the committee. Thanks committee members for being so prompt. I will start with the Dakota Land, Water, and People Acknowledgement. The Metropolitan Council acknowledges that the land we currently call Minnesota, and specifically the 7-county region, is the ancestral homeland of the Dakota Oyate, who are present and active contributors to our thriving region. As part of the Metropolitan Council's commitment to address the unresolved legacy of genocide, dispossession, and settler colonialism, and the fact that government institutions, including the Metropolitan Council, benefited economically, politically, and institutionally after the forcible removal of the Dakota Oyate, the Metropolitan Council is dedicated to instilling land, water, and people commitments in regional policy. These commitments support the Dakota Oyate, the 11 federally recognized tribes in Minnesota, Ho-Chunk Nation, and the American Indian communities representing over 150 diverse tribal nations that call the 7-county metro region home. We have been called to order. Committee members, you see the agenda in front of you. It's posted online as well. If there's no changes, we'll just consider that approved. It's approved. And then I would ask for a motion, please, to approve the June 1st, 2026 Community Development Committee minutes.
Move approval.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolf.
Seconded.
Thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom. Discussion, additions, corrections? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. We'll move on to our consent business. There's 3 items, 2026-103, 2026-104, and 2026-102. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move approval.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolf.
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. We'll move into our one non-consent business item is 2026-86. It's the Community Tree Planting Program Notice of Funding Availability. Jillian Greenberg is here. This isn't the first time we've seen this, but this is to authorize the issuance of the funding availability, correct? So, did you want to say something?
Yeah, our staff were here at our last meeting to discuss.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yep. So this is the act. We didn't take action at the last one. It was just an info item, and I really appreciated the rich conversation. It's a topic is maybe not the most money that we ever put out for grants, but it probably attracts the most attention and discussion. So cool. Jillian, please.
Great. Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Chair and committee members. As was mentioned, we're back talking about the Community Tree Planting Grant Program, and this time with a notice of funding availability for you all to authorize. I'll start with a very brief review of the program, knowing that we talked about it just 2 weeks ago, and then take a closer look at the proposed evaluation criteria, which answers some of the questions that came up in our discussion.
Great.
As we've discussed, this program was created by the state legislature in 2024, and the program purposes are set out in state statute. There are 3 purposes for the program: removing and planting trees on public land, replacing trees lost to pests, disease, or storms, and creating a more diverse tree canopy in the region. There are 2 statutorily defined program priorities. The first one is removing ash trees that pose public safety concerns. This priority addresses the challenge of addressing emerald ash borer, an invasive species that kills ash trees in our region. 2 weeks ago in discussion, a question came up about the prevalence of ash trees in our region today. And the best data we have on this comes from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. They conduct community tree surveys every 10 years, and so their most recent data is their 2020 survey. And that survey found that in across the 7 counties that make up our metro region, ash trees make up between 6 and 14% of community trees that were surveyed. So that's a pretty significant portion of trees, given that you don't want to have any given species representing more than 10% of trees in a given area. Those are general guidelines that the DNR provides communities to ensure a diverse tree canopy. The second priority set out in statute is projects located in a census block group with a supplemental demographic index score in the 70th percentile or higher within Minnesota. And in plain English, this is a priority that asks the program to use federal data to prioritize areas that have potentially higher community vulnerability. So the map on the right shows those prioritized areas in red. The program details for this upcoming cycle are a bit different from the last cycle we ran in 2026 or 2025. One of the main changes is that we have bonding funding this time around. So in the 2026 cycle, we're proposing awarding up to $3.4 million in grants. And this pot of money will have a mix of general funds and funds from the from bonding. And then in the 2027 cycle, we're proposing having up to $3.5 million available for competitive grants, and all of this will be bonding funding. Bonding funding has more restrictions than general funding, and so the program this year has a bit more restrictions on eligible activities. It limits grantees from using funding on government staff time, equipment purchases, or maintenance and establishment costs. Grantees will also have to go through a waiver declaration process, and fortunately, the timeline for this grant cycle is a bit more generous than for our 2025 cycle, so we're grateful that that will allow the grantees to have a bit more time to go through that administrative work on the front end. Project size remains the same in this notice of funding availability, so we will still accept projects ranging in size from, at the smallest, $10,000 up to $500,000. The evaluation approach has changed a bit from the 2025 cycle, and so we're going to talk through the project tiering criteria and evaluation criteria in more depth. So the proposed project tiering update is unchanged from our last conversation. This project tiering approach takes the two legislative priorities and awards grantees points based on how aligned their project is with those priorities. So for the ash priority, if a project is removing 30 or more ash trees, they receive the full 3 points and then receive fewer points for fewer trees as outlined in the table. For the priority around working in areas with higher community vulnerability, the scoring is based on what percentage of all trees are planted in those priority areas. So projects planting 75% or more of their trees in those priority areas would receive 3 priority points, and then it would decrease by percentage as outlined in the table. We would then combine the points from those two categories and determine the review tier for the project. So projects receiving 5 or 6 points would be reviewed in tier 1. Projects receiving 3 or 4 points are reviewed in tier 2, and projects receiving 0, 1, or 2 points would be reviewed in tier 3. And a panel will review the tier 1 applications first, award funding, and then if there's funds remaining, move on to tier 2. Again, if there's funds remaining, move on to tier 3. Since the conversation 2 weeks ago, we reviewed all of the 2025 applications with the new tiering structure to get a sense of how this structure would perform and whether it produces the desired outcomes. We discussed the approach to ash removals in this at the meeting 2 weeks ago, and so we looked especially back at all of the 2025 applications and found that 21 out of the 31 removed more than 30 ash trees. And that was, those 21 projects represented communities of all sizes. So we don't feel like the 30 tree threshold unfairly disadvantages small communities. It does disadvantage communities that have done a lot of ash tree removal already, and that is just the nature of the legislative priority that was set out in statute for this program. Most of the projects from the 2025 cycle would be reviewed under the same tier that they were in last year. There are a small minority that move between tiers, and that's largely a reflection of a few projects that squeaked into a higher tier by doing a small percentage of work under the priority. So in that sense, we feel like this more nuanced approach better reflects the program priorities and will align better with those outcomes. We do have a slight adjustment to the proposed evaluation criteria based on the conversation we had 2 weeks ago. 10 of the points from the project addresses climate change criteria category have moved to the project management category, and we're going to talk through each of these categories in more depth. So the project management criteria has 3 subcomponents. The first one is up to 15-point subcomponent, and up to 15 points is the highest number of points we give any subcomponent in this scoring proposed criteria. This first subcomponent is where reviewers can take into account the need and recent funding of the grantee. There will be a question on the application that asks if the grantee has received recent state or regional funds to support their community forestry work. And we felt that this approach made the most sense since there are similar state funding sources and since we have changed our program criteria since last year, but it still captures a way to reward past applicants that didn't receive funding in the last cycle. We also appreciate the feedback around making sure those applicants remain competitive, and we feel like they will still benefit because they'll be notified directly about the grant program. And beyond that, they also had the option to receive feedback on last year's application. So we offered all grantees who didn't receive funding a chance to have a call to talk through their application. And we spoke with 7 out of the 17 grantees, giving them specific feedback on where their responses didn't meet the average score on a given criteria. The second subcategory here addresses internal and contracted capacity that the grantee is proposing to use, just making sure that there will be people working on the project with the necessary forestry expertise. And the final subcategory here is making sure that grantees have a plan to communicate with residents about their project, trying to avoid residents being surprised by trees being removed in their neighborhood and encouraging grantees to think proactively about that. The criteria on the tree canopy health and resilience first looks at whether the project is aligned with that ash priority, bringing that legislative priority into the criteria. The second subcomponent addresses maintenance, making sure that the grantee is committed to doing the work to make sure the tree survives its first 3 years, which goes beyond the scope of the grant and the timeline of the grant, but it's still an important commitment from the grantee. The final category here is a smaller subcomponent of this criteria, and it addresses species tree identification. So as I mentioned before, the DNR has this new community tree survey data tool. So they had always collected the data, but they created a new public tool that went up in the last couple months. And almost every city and county in the region can look at the breakdown of their community trees by species. Plus, the funding for this program only allows communities to use the money to buy a climate resilient tree species, which we provide a list of. So the 5 points here is not meant to punish grantees for not having foresters on staff. We know that was a concern we discussed 2 weeks ago. Rather, it's meant to be a gut check for reviewers to make sure that the application was put together thoughtfully with the resources provided and usable to people who even might not have a technical background in this topic. The next evaluation criteria is focused on vulnerable communities. Again, this is pulling in the statutory priority aligned with this topic. The first subcomponent here looks at how an applicant selected the project locations based on aiming to serve vulnerable communities. So the council will be providing a map to applicants to be able to look more closely at that data that was provided in the map on a previous slide and see which areas within their community might meet that priority. The second subcomponent here looks at whether the project ensures that the vulnerable communities in their city or county benefit from the project. The evaluation criteria on addressing climate change impacts has a really similar approach to the previous criteria. You'll just notice that the point totals on each of the subcomponents are reduced in comparison. The first subcomponent looks at how an applicant selected project locations based on aiming to serve communities that have faced disproportionate climate impacts. And the map that the Met Council will be providing this year will also include the extreme heat and localized flooding data, so communities can combine the geographic data with the knowledge that they have of their city or their county and piece that together to explain why they picked the project locations they did. The second component here looks at ensuring that residents living in areas experiencing disproportionate climate impacts benefit from the projects. And the language here is really intentional, calling out residents, because we know that it's important that the projects don't only get targeted to places that experience extreme heat, but might not be residential locations. So that language was chosen intentionally. The program timeline is outlined here. We're here tonight, and then the notice of funding availability would move to council at the June 24th meeting. The application is scheduled to open on September 10th and then close on October 22nd after a 6-week application period. At that point, we will be jumping into an internal review of applications and then move to a panel review. We hope that by late 2026 or early 2027, we'll be bringing forward recommendations from that panel to council, depending on how holidays fall in all of that. Hopefully by early 2027, we're working on executing agreements with grantees. So the action before the committee tonight is to authorize the fund distribution for the community tree planting program in 2 rounds, one in 2026 and 2027. That's the $3.4 million in 2026 and $3.5 million in 2027. The second action is to authorize the attached notice of funding availability for the 2026 Community Tree Planting Grant Program to be issued after the council formally amends its budget to bring in new state appropriation funding. We are pulling funding that was appropriated this past legislative cycle into this grant program as discussed 2 weeks ago, and so it will be formally issued after that happens in early September. And with that, I'm pass it back to the chair and happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Jillian. Thanks for your report and for your work on this. And before I turn to the committee, I see Councilmember Lee is requesting. I have one question. Just at the very top of your comments today, you referenced something that I hadn't seen in any of the materials, something about applicants or grantees that need to apply for a waiver. What is that waiver, and to whom are they applying?
This is part of the bonding process. So it's a great question, Chair, and it's a part of this additional administrative process that comes with the bonding funding. The waiver is an alternative to a declaration, and this is going to test my knowledge of how bonding funding works, but we'll be working with applicants, and often it sounds like the waiver will be their preferred choice because trees are kind of unconventional infrastructure to fund with bonding dollars. And so the DNR has gone through this process in many grant cycles with bonding funding and find that the waiver process is often most appropriate.
Thanks, that's helpful. Discussion from the committee, Councilmember Lee.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Jillian. What is the definition of vulnerable communities? Is that the cities with the most trees that are ash trees?
Councilmember Lee, good question. The vulnerable communities is the shorthand that we've used to reference census block groups with a supplemental demographic index score in the 70th percentile or higher. which is language that came out of state statute. The Supplemental Demographic Index Score is a metric from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Environmental Justice Screening Tool, and it pulls together 5 demographic factors. So it's pulling income, persons with disability, education level, English speaking, and life expectancy into one index that's intended to provide perspective on community vulnerability. So when we use that language, it's our shorthand for that background.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Further discussion by committee members, questions, comments?
I just thank you for bringing this business item before us. As was stated by our chair, we did have a long, extended conversation, so I don't have any questions on it. I'm excited to be able to provide this to communities.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. I appreciate the efforts that you made to incorporate our discussion into the process and the scoring and everything. So thank you for doing that.
I agree. Thanks. I was going to say the same thing. Thanks, Jillian, for hearing us. Cool. If there's no further discussion, the motion, the council action is to authorize fund distribution for the community tree planting program in 2 rounds, one each in 2026 and 2027, and also to authorize the attached notice of funding availability for the 2026 community tree planting grant program to be issued after the council formally amends its budget to bring in the new state appropriation funding. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve?
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Chambers. Thank you, Councilmember Wolf. Discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thanks again, gentlemen. Excellent work. Now we'll move into our 3 information items. The first is an update on the fiscal disparities program. And so Maya Guerrero-Combs is here and Sarah Rodman. Welcome. Do we have this every year, Director Bass? Okay. Seems like it's been a minute.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. My name is Maya Guerrero-Combs, and I'm a planning analyst in the Livable Communities and Housing Work Unit and Community Development.
Hello, Chair and committee members. I'm Sarah Rodman, and I am the business analyst with the Livable Communities and Housing Work Unit.
So today we will both be presenting an update on the Fiscal Disparities Program for the 2026 fiscal year. We're going to start with a brief history of the program, then a summary of the program results for 2026, and then dive into some high-level tax-based trends that we've seen over the last few years.
Great.
So our metro area is known for a tax-based sharing program named Fiscal Disparities. The Fiscal Disparities Program was established by the Fiscal Disparities Act passed by the Minnesota legislature in 1971. The tax-based sharing program then began operating for a few years later. So it started a few years later in 1975, but that means it's been operating now for over 50 years. So through this state-run program, local taxing jurisdictions in the 7-county metro area all share part of their growth in commercial industrial net tax capacity, also known as commercial industrial tax base. The program is already built into our property tax system and is administered by county and state property tax administrators. The Fiscal Disparities Program continues to attract national and international interest as an innovative tool to improve fiscal equity by narrowing the gap between areas with the lowest tax base and the highest tax base. So what are the benefits of the program? The program meets various Met Council goals and has many benefits to the region, including improving equity and fiscal resources by reducing large differences in tax-based wealth among cities and townships. The program supports cost-effective regional wastewater treatment and transportation services by reducing competition for commercial and industrial tax base. And it also encourages land uses that protect the environment and increase livability but raise little to no revenue, such as regional parks, open space, and affordable housing. Should have known that last one. And I'll cover a high-level basics on how fiscal disparities works. So through the program, local taxing jurisdictions contribute 40% of their growth in commercial industrial tax base to a shared pool. And so that commercial industrial tax base includes all commercial, all industrial, as well as public utilities. So, and then the 40% of growth is based on the change since it was enacted, so since 1971. So it's only 40% of the growth since it was enacted is contributed to that shared pool. That shared pool of tax base is then redistributed to all eligible cities and townships. The redistribution is done using a formula that's outlined in state statute. This formula is based on population and relative property tax wealth. So relative property tax wealth means the market value of all property per person in a taxing jurisdiction, or in other words, net market value tax capacity per person compared to the average net market value tax capacity per person for the metro area. So how they compare to the average of the region. So really how that shakes out is that a city or township with relatively low net tax capacity receives a somewhat larger share of the shared pool area-wide tax base, and then a city or township with a relatively high property tax wealth receives a somewhat smaller share of the shared pool of area-wide tax base. So I mentioned eligible communities. So we have 177 eligible communities participating in the Fiscal Disparities Program in 2026. There are currently 6 areas that are excluded by statute: New Prague, Northfield, Hanover, Rockford, the MSP Airport, and the St. Paul Airport. Besides these statutory exclusions, a city or township can be found ineligible to participate by the state, and that's where the Met Council's role comes in. So the Met Council and the Minnesota Department of Revenue have a statutory role in determining eligibility to participate in the program. According to state statute, a community must be excluded if its comprehensive zoning and planning policies conscientiously exclude most commercial industrial development for reasons other than preserving an agricultural use. This was enacted so a city or township who deliberately excludes commercial industrial development can't benefit from the sharing of commercial industrial tax base. The Met Council takes a lead on this review with final determinations set by the Minnesota Department of Revenue. Under this exclusion, Sunfish Lake, Birchwood Village, St. Mary's Point, and Woodland have been found ineligible to participate in the program. And this is not new. So these cities have continued to be found ineligible for the past 20 years or more. So we're seeing consistency there.
So with that background, I'll get into the numbers for the 2026 fiscal year. The shared pool of tax base redistributed throughout the metro area with the Fiscal Disparities Program ended up being a little over 9% of the total tax base for taxes payable in 2026. As Maya explained, this is a portion of the commercial industrial tax base of the region. The portion that was shared was about 36% of the total commercial industrial tax base in the metro area for taxes payable in 2026. These shares are typical to what we've seen in the past 10 years. Looking now at the total amount in the shared pool for taxes payable in 2026, the Fiscal Disparities Program shared over $622 million in tax base, which is only $2 million more than in 2025. The redistribution of the shared pool led to over $825 million in tax revenue for cities and townships, which is $56 million more than in 2025. Since the total amount in the shared pool changed very little, the increase in revenue is mostly due to an increase in the area-wide tax rate of over 10 percentage points. Revenue goes to cities, townships, counties, school districts, and special taxing districts.
Because the Fiscal Disparities Program redistributes the shared tax base, communities are either net recipients or net contributors of tax base. Net recipients of tax base are communities where the distribution from the shared pool was greater than the contribution to the shared pool. For taxes payable in 2026, there were 101 net recipients, including 85 cities and 16 townships. On the other side, net contributors of tax base are communities where contribution to the shared pool is greater than the distribution from the shared pool. There were, in 2026, there were 76 total net contributors, including 52 cities and 24 townships. Historically, the program has always had more net recipients than net contributors. So here's a map of those 177 participating cities and townships. The map shows all net recipients or net contributors of the tax-based sharing program. The light red areas are net recipients, and the ones in light blue are net contributors. And then white areas are areas that are excluded. Sorry, in the previous one. This one, the white areas are not excluded. Apologies. This map focuses on our top 20 net recipients and net contributors. The top 20 net contributors are in blue, and as you can see, they're mainly located in areas that are connected to major job centers and public infrastructure, such as the I-494 and I-694 ring and the MSP airport, but we are seeing more suburban net contributors. These top 20 net contributors make up over 40% of all commercial industrial tax base in the metro region. And the top 5, which are Bloomington, Plymouth, Edina, Eden Prairie, and Eagan, make up almost 20% of all commercial tax base in the region. In the light red color, we have the top 20 net recipients. The top 5 net recipients are St. Paul, Minneapolis, Brooklyn Center, Apple Valley, and Columbia Heights. St. Paul has long been the top net recipient. The top 20 net recipients and the top 20 net contributors have stayed fairly static over the last few years, but very notably this year, Minneapolis, which has been a net contributor for the last 14 years, became a net recipient. Minneapolis alone is over 12% of the commercial industrial tax base in the region, but also has a high population and lower property tax wealth, meaning that Minneapolis has always contributed the largest amount to fiscal disparities and receives a large amount. This is not the first time Minneapolis has been a net recipient of fiscal disparities, but later on in our presentation, we will go over contributing factors to why that switch happened in 2026.
This tax-based sharing works to reduce large disparities in property tax wealth and improve equity in fiscal resources for cities and townships. An easy way to measure that is looking at the difference in the property tax wealth between cities. The difference in property tax wealth is measured by the ratio of the highest to the lowest commercial industrial tax base per person for communities with a population of 10,000 or more. Without fiscal disparities, the ratio of the highest to lowest commercial industrial tax base per person is 14:1. With fiscal disparities, that disparity narrows to 5:1, creating a more equitable region in regards to fiscal resources. If you were to include all participating communities, not just those with a population of 10,000 or more, the ratio of the highest to lowest narrows from 47:1 to 23:1. Oops. Yeah, okay. Last year, we presented on recent trends in commercial industrial tax base to determine whether post-pandemic changes in commercial property was having an effect on the fiscal disparities program. We showed that the commercial industrial tax base increased in 2025, albeit at a much slower rate than the average since 2020. This year, we're reporting a slight decline in total commercial industrial tax base, shown by the dashed line and light blue area in this chart. This is the basis of the fiscal disparities contribution calculation. Despite this decline, the region's net tax capacity as a whole, shown by the solid black line, increased from 2025 due to growth in other areas of the tax base. Looking more closely at the components of the commercial industrial tax base, I've broken out the trend by industrial tax base, shown by the light blue area between the dashed line and the solid line, and the commercial tax base, shown by the dashed line and dark blue area beneath. You can see that the industrial tax base actually grew in 2026, but not enough to offset the larger decline in commercial tax base. Next, we wanted to find out what areas of the region this decline was coming from and look for possible explanations. We'll share a few more slides with analysis of the commercial tax base component. Before moving into discussion on the community designations and contribution by community designation, I'll show a map of how cities are categorized. These are the Imagine 2050 designations recently updated last year. For our historical trend analysis, we assigned all cities and townships to their current 2050 designations rather than the designation at the time the data was collected. This means some cities and townships have shifted categories since we last presented. Dark orange on the map represents the urban classification. Light orange is the urban edge. The suburban and suburban edge communities are shown in a lime green and light lime green respectively, and rural and agricultural communities are represented by shades of green. Here is a chart showing the commercial tax base by community designation, again, by the 2050 community designations. Shown by the dark orange solid line, we see that the decline in commercial tax base was driven nearly completely by urban cities. However, you'll notice the large growth those cities experienced over the last decade. Urban cities' commercial tax base grew very quickly relative to the other community designations since 2016. The decline over the past 2 years puts urban cities closer in line with suburban cities, shown by the lime green dashed line. Since that commercial tax base is a component of the fiscal disparities contribution, I am showing now just the contribution to the shared pool. Since contribution amount is based on growth in commercial industrial tax base, and the commercial industrial tax base was relatively the same as last year, it follows that the total contribution from all cities is roughly the same as last year. After fast growth over the last decade, the pool of shared tax base has leveled out in 2026. Next, we looked at trends in the contribution to the shared pool of tax base by community designation to see how the change in tax base affected contribution from each community designation. First, I want to point out that with our new 2050 community designations, the trend looks a little different than it has in past presentations, due to more cities now falling under the suburban designation, such as Plymouth and Hastings, and the suburban edge designation. We used to have an emerging suburban edge designation, and those cities are now part of the suburban edge for the most part. The suburban contribution is higher than urban for the entire time period shown, whereas prior designations had urban contribution surpassing suburban since 2017. All of the community designations had large increases in contribution in the early 2020s. This year, we see a slower pace of growth than recent years in all community designations, but urban cities as a whole were the only group to decline in 2026. The modest growth in contribution to the shared pool by other community designations offset the drop in contribution from urban cities, such that the total change for 2026 was relatively small. Looking now at geographic trends, the two charts here show the commercial tax base by county, as well as the fiscal disparities contribution by county since 2010. Hennepin County far outpaces the other counties in commercial tax base, and therefore contributes a majority of the tax base to the shared pool. Many cities in Hennepin County are among the top 20 contributors, as we saw earlier in the presentation. Hennepin County also has had the most dramatic decline in tax base among the 7 counties. Ramsey County also saw a small decline, but the other 5 counties were flat or had slight increases. Overall, the decline in fiscal disparities contribution from Hennepin County was less dramatic, likely bolstered by the growth in industrial tax base. Other than Ramsey County, the other counties had small increases in contribution.
Great. Now, as mentioned earlier, we wanted to investigate why Minneapolis, who has been one of our top net contributors over the past few years, switched to a net recipient. And we discovered that the main driver of the commercial tax-based decline that Sarah just went over was specifically Minneapolis. So Minneapolis lost over $25 million in commercials, not commercial industrial, just commercial tax base in 2026. And you can see that decline represented in the purple line on the chart. However, this trend is not isolated to Minneapolis. Even when removing Minneapolis from the regional total, as shown by the solid black line, and the Hennepin County total, as indicated by the dashed pink line, we see declines in the regional total in Hennepin County, as well as some of the other counties, or remaining pretty static. Minneapolis's loss in commercial tax base resulted in about a 14 million decrease in contribution to the fiscal disparities shared pool. But increases in other areas in the region in industrial tax base offset the overall regional contribution to the shared pool, and cities and townships received a fairly similar amounts of distribution as they did in 2025. To sum things up, there's not really enough information to see if trends will continue for Minneapolis or the rest of the region, but similar to housing and other markets, we're really seeing a slowing down and an evening out after really strong market growth since 2020. Great. So updated information about the fiscal disparities program, including specifics on 2026 values, is available on the council's my council's website, as well as links to resources about the history of the program and its impacts on the region, including a 2026 report that the Minnesota House did, which is really interesting. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Sarah. Fascinating. Questions or discussion? Councilmember Lee, then Councilmember Wolf.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Chair. This might be a dumb question, but definitely arcane. I assume St. Paul doesn't have a lot of land on the roads because we host a lot of government and nonprofit properties. So does that disadvantage St. Paul's participation, or does that help explain why we're a net recipient?
So, sorry, Chair, committee members, I wouldn't say disadvantage. I would say that is probably an indicator of why St. Paul has been our largest net recipient for a long time. So not only does St. Paul have a large population, they're probably limited in the amount that can be contributed due to other land uses, such as public land use, nonprofit, affordable housing, things like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this data based on January 1 property values, or what time frame are we looking at here?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think we can go back and check the data, but it would be property values in 2025. But yeah, I don't think I know that, but we could get back to you.
Director Bras, do you have a?
I think you're right, Sarah. Thank you. It's the valuation at the end of 2025 for the 2026 property taxes.
Yes, the end of 2025. Okay.
So follow up,
Yeah,
Mr.
please.
So that means some of the changes that we've seen recently with some of the big buildings in downtown having a loss of value and selling for small amounts, it may continue that trend of challenges for the Minneapolis
Next year.
tax base.
Well, thanks, Councilmember. Yeah, Maya.
Yeah, that's a really, I mean, Minneapolis is a really interesting, and we dived in, and it was hard to pick what to put in this presentation. We're seeing a lot, so that commercial decline is really significant. So I think in total market value for commercial 3A properties, which is retail, offices, things like that, Minneapolis saw over a 1.2 billion decrease in total market value, but it saw increases in a lot of other areas. And so there was the losing of office buildings, but there's also conversion of a lot of commercial to housing. And so net tax capacity in Minneapolis actually went up, and it was largely due to increases in other areas. So it's interesting, and I'm excited to see what happens next year. Well, interested to see what happens next year. So.
Great. Thanks for that background, Maya. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks. So part of our role is to conduct an eligibility review. And I'm wondering, is that ever controversial?
Chair, committee members, no.
You're in or you're out, and it's pretty crystal clear.
It's pretty, and I review, even though these cities have been ineligible for 20 years. I go in and I read their comp plan, and they very specifically say, we do not plan for any commercial industrial, and is fairly straightforward, yeah.
Thanks, good question. Yeah, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Do we, in this evaluation, do we kick it up to the legislature? Do they ask for this type of information? I imagine they would. They're in charge of the whole kit and caboodle and the formula and everything.
Yeah, Chair, committee members, they do their own research. So like I said, there's that 2026 paper, and so they report out on it. Because we have that small part of eligibility, and because it's based in the metro region, we've taken upon ourselves to, report out on this and get the information out there, but they run the whole program themselves and collect all that information, yeah.
Thanks.
Further discussion, questions, comments? Hearing none, thanks for the report, and yeah, thanks for the work on this. Fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next information item is an update on research about impacts of metro surge on small businesses and regional economy, and ongoing project right here. And so we'll get an update on that project. We have quite a team, it looks like. So we have Darcy, Asha, and Barris. Is that? Barish. Barish. Thank you. My apologies. Welcome.
Welcome. Good afternoon, council members, chair. Before we get started, I want to introduce my new colleague, Asha Warsame, who has joined the qualitative research team in community development in February. So I'm really happy to have her on my team.
Welcome, Ms. Warsame. Very welcome. Is this your first time in committee?
Yes.
Okay, we'll go easy.
Yeah. So, good afternoon, and we are here today to introduce the start of a research project, and we come before you to share. We consider this a responsive research project to understand long-term economic effects across the region and specifically on small businesses of Operation Metro Surge. We refer to this as responsive to both council members' articulated concerns and also the consensus of the region stakeholders about the significance of these events. A couple of framing comments. We use the term here post-Metro Surge to mark the time period after the federal government announced the reduction of federal agents to the region, but like the term post-pandemic, we're using the term to describe a change in conditions rather than an abrupt cutoff. And then also, as researchers connected to community-based organizations and to economic research units across the region, we can reasonably anticipate that, like the pandemic, the region is going to experience long-term effects of Operation Metro Surge. These effects deserve identifying the policy implications that come with them, and also deserve conducting research for understanding across a wide array of topics. So one thing we want to say as a framing comment is, although we have scoped this project very carefully, it is not the only research or policy conversation that is needed. As I will describe shortly, we are focusing on this one aspect because we believe it closely aligns with the Council's commitments and its regional goals as articulated in Imagine 2050. Next slide, please.
I think you have the clicker.
Oh, next slide, Darcy. Yes. It doesn't, okay. So in today's presentation, I will kick off. I will turn it over to my colleague, Barish Gumustas, and then to our colleague, Asha Warsame. I will begin by talking about the rationale for the research and diving into that a little bit. Then my colleagues will describe the three project elements, and then I will rejoin you to talk about next steps. And really, we are hoping that this will be a discussion as it is in early stages, and just as a preview, the things that we would love to hear from you from as our policymakers are what you have been seeing in your district, both in terms of Operation Metro Surge and the contributions of small businesses in creating a dynamic and resilient region. Also, who you imagine audiences for this research, and finally, who you might imagine as stakeholders in convening important conversations about the implications. Just a little preview of where we're going. So why is community development undertaking this research? I mean, first of all, as you know, we have 5 goals for Imagine 2050, and one of them is a dynamic and resilient region. And we want to analyze the impacts of an event that does threaten the resilience of the region. We want to collaborate with our regional partners to identify regional strategies, and this is part of what our council is charged to do. And then finally, we want to understand trends affecting the workforce and examine how local governments can respond in a number of ways. We also, my colleague Barish, along with others in community development, created the 2025 Regional Economic Framework, and we made a commitment in the Regional Economic Framework to hold future convenings as needed that can help continue the conversation around the region's economy, and we see this as part of that work. One other thing I wanted to note, because it's something often we're thinking about, we also want to note that the governor has created the Minnesota Truth Council, and we see this as a separate initiative, but our work is complementary. And as we understand it, this initiative of the Truth Council is to document harms and how Minnesotans came together in Operation Metro Surge. And while our research is complementary to this, we have additional objectives we want to talk with you about, the focus, and we have additional stakeholders. And we're hoping to learn more about your thoughts in the conversation later. So before I turn it over to my colleagues, I will just briefly introduce the 3 elements of the project. One of them is a set of analyses that Barish will tell you about that is data on the economic contributions of immigrants to the Twin Cities region. So what are, why, when we're thinking about a dynamic and resilient economy, what part do immigrants play in that economy? The second is carried out by our qualitative research team, and I want to acknowledge that anytime you see me or Asha here, we are actually a team, and I want to acknowledge that that outreach coordinator Claudia Fuentes and researcher Zhu Gong are here with us today, and we have really worked on this project as a team. And this project is, as Asha will tell you, is looking at the voices of small businesses across the region, identifying the on-the-ground long-term effects of Metro Surge on what we're calling Main Street business. Actually, we're not calling, the literature calls Main Street businesses that meet the everyday needs of people in their neighborhoods. And so we can contrast this with some other types of businesses. So Main Street businesses throughout the region. And then finally, the third element of the project is the potential of convening regional stakeholders in looking at the policy implications and thinking about resiliency in the region. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Brish.
Welcome, Bruce. Thanks for being here.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the first element of this project, which is it has a quantitative research component. And this portion of the project provides context to the work that Darcy and Asha and their team does. We're not strictly looking at the impact of the surge on communities, but we're looking at the overall contribution. We're trying to quantify the overall contribution of immigrants to the community. So it's providing some context, the context within which these small businesses are operating. And we're looking at 5 different contributions. Specifically, we're focusing on their contributions to future population and workforce growth. They play an essential role, and we would like to quantify that. Some of this work we have done in the Regional Economic Framework. We are repackaging some of the work and adding new information to it. We then look at the distribution of immigrant workforce across industries to quantify the degree to which they are integral to the economy. And then we look at the occupational breakdown of these of the immigrant workforce to see the kinds of occupations they're working in and how exactly they contribute to the economy by supporting essential services that sustain the growth of the regional economy. We also look at the fiscal contributions. We look at 5 different types of taxes and quantify that and try to describe what types of, or to what extent, public services are funded by these taxes. And finally, we did an economic impact analysis where we look at the overall contributions of the workforce, immigrant workforce, other than just their workforce participation, their contributions in terms of GDP as well. On that note, I will turn it over to Asha, and I'll come back later.
Thank you. Asha, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman and Council members. The second element really centers the voices and lived experiences of small business owners who have been directly affected by Operation Metro Surge. Our goal is to document both the immediate and the long-term impact on businesses across the region. And while economic indicators can tell us part of the story, they don't capture how business owners are experiencing these changes day to day. And so to do this, we've identified geographic nodes across the region where impact may be concentrated and conducted interviews and ethnographic observations with business owners. So we are conducting this work in multiple languages, including English, Mandarin, Somali, and Spanish, to ensure that we can hear directly from communities in the language that they are most comfortable using. And through these conversations and observations, we hope to understand not only the economic impacts, but also how business owners are adapting, what challenges they continue to face, and what forms of support are most needed. Ultimately, the findings will help inform future policy discussions and identify potential levers that can support residents' well-being, strengthen economic resilience, and help communities recover and thrive over time. As you can see, we have a map here of the economic nodes that we've selected. And so to understand the Operation Metro Surge effects on small businesses across the region, we first identified 8 economic nodes that represent different affected business types, communities, and geographic locations. We started interviews with small businesses at these nodes in February of 2026 when I got here. And so the economic nodes in the research are representatives of different types of Main Street business locations. Economic nodes included here are areas that received intensive media coverage and are part of a widespread understanding about Metro Surge activities in Minneapolis and St. Paul, such as Lake Street, East Street, Payne Avenue, and the west side of St. Paul. We included East Franklin to understand key experiences of American Indian serving businesses. We also wanted to understand the breadth of Metro Surge's impact by including representative areas that are situated outside the Twin Cities and showing the regional effects. These included Columbia Heights, also Hilltop, Burnsville, and Eden Prairie. Together, they allow us to capture the experiences across a diverse set of geographic, cultural, and economic context. So within each node, we plan to conduct monthly interviews with approximately 10 to 20 businesses over time. And this longitudinal approach allows us to move beyond a snapshot and understand how impacts evolves, persist, or changes as conditions tend to shift. So in addition to interviews, we will use ethnographic observations to document what is happening on the ground. And this really helps us to understand not only the economic impact, but also the psychological, the social, and community level effects that may not appear in traditional economic indicators. An important part of this work is really understanding the role that small businesses play as a community, as community anchors. Businesses often serve as gathering spaces, sources of information, social support, networks, and cultural hubs. So by listening directly to business owners, we can better understand how change affects both businesses and the broader communities that they serve. We've also found that a lot of the business owners are really eager to share their experiences with us, which really highlights the importance of documenting these stories and ensuring that they inform future planning and policy discussions. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Darcy. Thank you.
Thank you, Darcy.
And I think actually
Birch.
I'm jumping in really quickly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the third component of this research. We're hoping that our qualitative and quantitative research culminates in some sort of a convening with a cross-sector of regional stakeholders. And the idea behind that is to have these stakeholders focus on not only short and long-term recovery, but also long-term resilience of these small businesses. And among the stakeholders, regional stakeholders, we were thinking of state agencies, city and county governments, CDFIs, community organizations, ethnic chambers of commerce, and also, most importantly, the small businesses themselves. And there are three goals that we have for such a convening. First, we want to elevate the voices of the small businesses that are impacted by this operation. And we want to highlight the challenges that they faced. So we will envision them coming and talking to the regional stakeholders, enlightening people about their circumstances. Secondly, we would like to look at the gaps in the support systems. We are hearing that things are not necessarily proceeding in terms of assistance provided to these organizations. So we would like to identify the gaps and also pinpoint barriers to recovery. So hopefully the regional stakeholders who are in a position to fund these small businesses and help with recovery will be there to see their positions and be able to explain their own. And finally, we are hoping that this will be a collaborative environment where people, regional stakeholders would get together to develop actionable strategies. That's one thing that we're hearing a lot. People would like some action on the ground. And this would be not only for short and long-term recovery, like I mentioned, there is an emphasis on long-term resilience as well. We keep having events like George Floyd, the pandemic, and now this. Overall, in the long run, some resilience of small businesses is something that is in the minds of our regional stakeholders. On that note, I'll turn it back to Darcy.
Thanks,
Thank you.
So although we have started collecting data, we like to say generating data, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of framing the research and in thinking about the stakeholders. Yes, so.
Musical break.
My anthem is here. Okay. But we are going to be coming back fairly soon to Committee of the Whole on July 5th. Barish will come and present our immigrant contributions data, and on July 15th. Did I say that? July 15th. And then August 5th, the Voices of Small Business data update will come before Committee of the Whole. And the convening is something at a time to be determined, partly because there's so much to hear in terms of recommendations and thinking about stakeholders. So with that, we will move to discussion questions, and we would love to hear any of these pieces from you as well as any other questions you might have for us. But we would really like to hear the long-term effects that you are seeing in your district. Based on your observations, how have small businesses contributed to Imagine 2050's vision for a dynamic and resilient region? What audiences do you anticipate for these research results? And what key conversations and outcomes would you hope to see emerge from a post-Metro Surge small business resiliency convening? Thank you.
Great. This is very exciting work, and I'm sure committee members are going to want to jump in. But before we do, if I may just ask one question, and I think you've kind of answered this along the way, and I'm just thrilled that we're doing this work. And I know we're teeing this up, and so I've been looking at all the statistics that you see in the news about economic impacts even on small businesses. And I thought, well, how are we not going to be just redundant on the efforts that are already happening? But now I see that there's opportunity here, right, to build knowledge about our small business community, to serve our small business communities more fully. And it's a hard niche, right? A hard spot to get into. And so all of a sudden I'm seeing this as an opportunity as well. Metro Surge was very painful for a lot of us, but if we can find something to build on from there, I just think that's amazing. So this is what you kind of touched on, but Darcy or Asha or anyone, what do we know today? Where are we starting from? Or is this kind of a new starting point in data that we're collecting about small businesses, specifically immigrant small businesses?
Yes, thank you for that question. And I'm a little hesitant to go too deeply because we really want to analyze the data with care and the patterns. But if I could, I'll just share some of the things that we have looked at as our team. There's some sort of historical record documenting. We've talked to small businesses because we started our data collection in February and March, just hearing about what the experiences was like during Operation Metro Surge in all 8 economic nodes, and also what happened to revenues for those businesses. And businesses, many of these stories will be familiar to you, but we are documenting them systematically in terms of lost revenue and having to close for a period of time, experiencing staffing shortages. There's several things like that. Asha, is there anything else about during the peak of Metro Surge that I'm missing from those?
I think you've covered majority of the information, and we're going to go deeper when we present again in August and share more of the findings.
And then we learned about the time in after peak Operation Metro Surge, that this period that for many businesses hardship continued, that their clients did not return because of fear and lack of money. Also that there was a need to do cost cutting once they saw that while Metro Surge peak had receded, there was a need to make adjustments over the long term. And we were really hearing a lot about the ripple effects of cost cutting. So, and we'll talk about that in depth in August when we come back. We also learned a lot about the community, the ways that these businesses make specific contributions to their community, both the geography of the area they're in and the community that they serve, whether that is providing translation services, things that are not part of what their business is doing, providing credit when money is short in households, providing knowledge about other aspects of the local community for people who are new to the Twin Cities to gain access, creating gathering spaces, and also liaisons between and across communities. And then I would say those are the things that we'd like to highlight.
I appreciate it, Darcy. I was thinking more before Metro Surge, what was our data, but we don't, this is a whole new era, right? We're moving in a different way.
And Chair Lilligan, actually, your comment makes me think of one thing that we see as a contribution of this is also understanding how sort of, we might call it how there are compounding externalities. In other words, Operation Metro Surge moved some businesses into a position of disadvantage, and then there were other conditions such as inflation, the increase in gas prices, challenges with staffing, and also things that local small businesses feel concerns about of taxes within their community, rising rents. And so those things, Operation Metro Surge impacted those things for businesses as well.
Thanks.
So because we're going for 2 years, we will be able to really understand what small businesses experience over the long term.
Great, thank you for that. Discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, this is really interesting, and I'm glad that we're taking the leadership stance and coordinating convening for these issues. I'm glad to see that the research is going to include the psychological and sociological / political factors. And I think there's some learning to be done regarding, pre-Metro Surge. You want to get the baseline information about how these businesses were doing and how they were impacted by issues like the pandemic, as you mentioned, and other things that could be coming, even some changes due to like artificial intelligence could impact small businesses in the future. You know, there are different things that happen at different times, and maybe some of the learning of this process can be used to look at what you were saying as the compounding externalities and factors that were lingering after the Metro surge. So I think there's a lot of information and data to unpack, and I look forward to getting that information. And I think getting into the data will help to help others understand what the facts are and what the myths are and what some of the contributing and compounding factors are, so that when we do try to look at issues and provide solutions or policy, we can help prevent and also mitigate issues that are like this or similar to this in the future.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Lee, then Councilmember Lindstrom, then Councilmember Wolf. Councilmember Lee.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. This is great and fascinating work. I think this really should be a part of our ongoing body of work and research, because we are responsible for planning for long-term growth. When I think of Japan is facing falling birth rates, and people are marrying older, and so the government is trying to incentivize people to make more babies. And Russia is in the same place, but Russia is for different reasons, right? But their men are dying on the battlefield, and their civilians are fleeing as refugees. And so in 2.5 years, this federal administration is going to end, but the state of Minnesota is going to continue to be one of the most welcoming places for refugees and immigrants. And so this is why it's important for us to continue to track this work. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Yeah, thanks. Boy, these are some big questions that you are asking. I feel like we could have a conversation for the rest of the night on each one of these different bullet points. Some things that come to mind for me about long-term effects of Metro surge in my community. Economic, no question. I mean, like the ability to pay utility bills, the ability to pay rent. Some things that you've already touched on, workforce shortages in industries that rely on immigrants. Continued reliance on food assistance and emergency support. Local government impacts on things like public safety, overtime expenses. I think, though, although the economic impacts are measurable, some easier than others, like some will be really difficult to measure. How do you measure the economic impact of a kindergartner that had to stay home for 2 months? I mean, that's a long-term economic impact. How do you measure economically the trauma inflicted on a family? Because their mom was taken to some detention facility in Nebraska for weeks. So we have the economic impact, but we also have the lack of trust in institutions, in schools, in certainly the federal government, but all levels of government. How do you build that back up? What's the economic impact of that? So good luck.
You're working it out.
Yeah.
Is that a council member?
I think that's it on bullet point number 1.
Oh, okay. All right, you're making your way through.
For now.
Cool. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you guys talking with construction companies? I know that's a big area that has, in fact, I was talking to the manager from when we had our siding replaced in 2021, and the crew that worked on my house is gone, they left.
Yeah, Councilmember Wolf, that's a great question, and I appreciate it. One of the challenges when designing the methodology is scoping it to something that can be answered with rigor. And I think as I kicked off the conversation, there are so many topics. You alluded to many about families and schools and the psychological trauma of individuals. You're alluding to wider economic sectors that are incredibly important. We are defining the scope of this research as Main Street businesses that are not because we could go for construction, landscaping and gardening, childcare that were disproportionately impacted, and we're hoping that others will pick up this research as well. So that's a very long way of saying no, but not because it's not important, but because we had to scope it in some way.
And I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, please.
So immigrant is a very broad term. Are you looking at different statuses within? Because I actually had a long conversation about this with my sister-in-law this weekend, who is a immigrant from Peru who has gotten her citizenship in 2024. And she talks to people all the time of different statuses, and it seems like the impact is different. You know, if you're completely undocumented, if you have some sort of work permission, or if you have achieved citizenship, are you looking at any of that nuance?
Chair, Councilmember, thank you for that question, and I kind of have a two-part answer. The first is that our units of analysis are first of all defined by geographic node, and the business owners and employees are from many different backgrounds and national origins. Some of them are born in the United States and are from ethnic and racial groups that were not necessarily seen as targets during Operation Metro Surge. So independent of, so when we're talking to the African-American barber shop, or we're talking to the pizza parlor that has been in business serving predominantly white customers for 2 decades, we're looking at a variety within these economic nodes to partly show that the effects of the American Indian community in East Franklin, to partly show that the impacts are much broader than only folks based on immigration status. The second piece is that we do not ask about immigration status, but of course that comes up as part of conversations often. And I think one of the things that we have found is that immigration status plays less of a role in the stories that small business owners are telling us than you might think. I mean, in terms of fear, in terms of feeling like one's ability to do business was curtailed because of inability, like lack of mobility, of feeling like you have to have your passport present. There was a lot of similarities across immigration status. And that being said, there is some ways that immigration status will play a role in the results, and although we are not asking people that question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just chime in very quickly?
Yeah, please.
On the quantitative part of our research, we only look at foreign-born populations, and that's regardless of their immigration status. It's only because the data is produced like that. We try to slice and dice it differently, but that seems to be the cleanest way to do it.
Thank you. Yeah, Councilmember Wolf.
Of what I've seen in my community, there's definitely been, businesses that the employees are not here anymore. I've seen that all over the place. But one thing that has been coming up in conversations with friends and family that are immigrants is it used to be people didn't really care that much about keeping up their paperwork. Like I was talking to a friend whose brother-in-law, his wife is an immigrant, and then her brother came over, and he had all his paperwork, and you have to keep updating it. And he didn't really want to do that. And my friend said, no, make sure your paperwork is up to date. And when all of this happened, he was like, I'm really glad I kept up with my paperwork and didn't just ignore it, because his friends were saying, oh, you'll be fine. You don't have to, you know. And so there are I think there's a lot more interest in what the law says and what you have to do in order to keep your status that maybe was considered, who cares, for a little while.
Yeah, please, Darcy.
Thank you for sharing that experience, Councilmember Wolf. And it did make me think of something that small business owners told us. And we do try to go in without tipping our hand about what our viewpoint is at all. We really want to create an open canvas for them to tell their stories. And many of them told stories that it really didn't matter about what their immigration status was, that we heard so many stories of staff who were arrested and in some cases taken out of state, and they had an authorized immigration status, and it didn't matter.
Thank you, Darcy. I was going to make that point as well. It didn't really matter what the status is. It was more how well you fit a profile, right? And I said that a lot. So just quickly, the long-term effects, I think everyone's done a good job of that, especially Councilmember Lindstrom. And I guess just to note that there are long-term effects, and there can be kind of nuanced, right? And so I think you did a great job of talking about that. I like the second question, and how have small businesses contributed to Imagine 2050? And I wish I had an answer for you, but I really don't know how they have contributed. And so we have a pretty good point to observe this, and I can't, I'm sure there's been contributions, but I think it would be good for us to be clearer about how we're connecting the small business community. And earlier when I was talking about there's opportunities here, I feel like this is one of them. And, I come from an organizing background, a lot of us do, and an economic development background, but this seems like it is a real big opportunity to organize into these important small business communities. And we have our 8 nodes or whatever, but we can really start to generalize that or use these same kind of engagement tools to broaden this. I would like to know more about how small businesses contributed or even see themselves in 2050's vision for a dynamic and resilient region. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to do that. So I'm glad we're leveraging this opportunity. The audiences, that could be broad, right? And like I said, I've just lately, it seems like there's a bunch of numbers coming out about the economic impact of Metro Surge. And so I was kind of wondering how ours kind of fit into this, all of this activity. And now I'm seeing more and more how it can. And so kind of blending into the outcomes, I would really like this to do a couple of things from a Met Council perspective, that we can see how our economic development tools can serve not just this community, but broadly the small business community throughout the region. And, we got to start somewhere. So here's a place that we're starting, but I would like us to see sort of concrete responses from a policy or resource level at the Met Council to serve the broader small business community, but definitely these communities that were impacted. 3 of the 8 nodes are in my district. They're actually where I live, where I work, and where I shop, right? And so I really saw the impact, businesses closing. And it still feels that way. It doesn't feel like it did before, and I don't know if it ever will. I think to Councilmember Lindstrom's point, people just don't trust going out in public even. But I was going to go back to the first question and being kind of an asset-based person. One of the long-term effects that I see kind of enduring or sustaining were the incredible social, well, they were just social, but the incredible networks that kind of suddenly overlapped, right? And a lot of the work that we were all doing was kind of shadowy, right? You didn't want an electronic document of who you were delivering food to, right? It had to be very analog because electronics could be breached, right? And so I see this as faith communities, community organizations, ethnic communities, family groups, but they've all kind of overlapped a little now, and I would say that there's more relationship there than there was before Metro Surge. And I think that's an asset that can be leveraged into this work that we're doing here. So, yeah, thanks. Yeah, Councilmember Lindstrom.
On the second bullet, how have small businesses contributed to Imagine 2050's vision for a dynamic and resilient region? I was thinking about neighborhoods that I really like to go to. And it usually involves small businesses, oftentimes restaurants or cafes. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, you know why I like my neighborhood? It's got this little place called McDonald's. Such a cozy little place. You know what I mean? It's always a cafe that they like to go to, or a hardware store, a place that knows your name, right, when you walk in. So that's small businesses. I think small businesses contribute to a resilient region. I'll flip this on its head, thinking about a region that maybe only depends on one big employer, and how not resilient that could be if you're Detroit and the auto industry goes downhill. I'm sure there's many other examples out there, but small businesses build just by being a million of them. They build in that resiliency into your economy.
That is an excellent point, and Councilmember Wolf is requesting the floor, but I want to go back. I was reading that question more about how small businesses actually impacted Imagine 2050, but I agree with Councilmember as a contributor to a resilient regional dynamic and region. They are a contributor. You call them Main Street businesses. I don't love the term, but I get why you're using it. But those small businesses along Lake Street, along East Street, along Franklin, you know, that I go to a lot. That so I do see that is a direct contribution to the resiliency of the region. Thanks, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, I agree that small businesses absolutely are essential, and we have data on what size employers we have in the region. So, you know, that part is the easy part. But I think the part that's a question for me is how well the small business owners feel supported in these different nodes. Because, like, when I was on the Lakeville Planning Commission and City Council, we spent years working on support for the historic downtown part of Lakeville that's, you know, 100 and some years old. And working with the businesses, the owners, and trying to preserve the vitality of that area and do whatever we could to make sure that they would be successful as businesses. But I don't know if the people in these nodes feel that way. I mean, I have a friend who had a business on East Lake Street that got burnt down during 2020.
Sure.
And he was livid at the response. You know, they wanted him to pay his taxes before he could even think about rebuilding for a building that was, you know, his file cabinets were in the basement because everything was gone except for a little bit of brick. Now are businesses feeling supported, or do they feel like maybe there's not that connection with, you know, public safety and government services and the neighborhood and all of that? I think that would be a good thing to know.
Chair and Councilmember Wolf, yeah, thank you for that. And I like how you frame, you know, how do small businesses feel supported? And we will definitely have data to share with you in August about that. So thank you.
Great, good points. Looking forward to it. Anything else from the committee? Anything else from the team? Nope. Great work. I look forward to the report in August. I suspect I know what some of these answers are, what we're going to learn. The quick answer, Councilmember Wolf, to your question is no.
Well, maybe that's something that needs to have a conversation.
I agree. So yeah, thanks. This is really exciting work. Thank you. And our final information item today is the 2027 Community Development Preliminary Operating Budget, and Heather Giesel is here to present. Welcome.
Hello. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members. I'm Heather Giesel. I'm the Director of Finance and Finance and Administration for Community Development and Metropolitan Transportation Services. So the presentation allows us to highlight some of the program accomplishments that have happened over the past couple of years and preview work happening in 2026 and then upcoming in 2027. So for today, a little bit of background on how we build the budget, some new data visualization for 2027, including some new ways of looking at sources and uses. I'll give my hat tip to Kristen Ribaturas, who did a lot of work with me to develop some of these new visuals, revamping the presentation after a couple years of seeing some of the same information. We'll examine some recent budget trends, looking at how growth has allowed us to provide more assistance, data, and funding to the region, and how we've advanced Imagine 2050 policies and goals, seeing this growth applied practically towards regional development goals. The primary focus of our work, and therefore the budget we build, is to support Imagine 2050, most specifically the Housing Policy Plan and the Regional Parks Policy Plan. The framing is the list of items that you all as a committee have helped develop over the course of your time here. Framing the issues is what our regional role is, providing data analysis and research, equity impacts and general economic conditions, identifying ways where we can leverage other regional, state, or federal funds where we can, and figuring out how and where we can make timely financial impacts. Also supporting council initiatives like the Climate Action Work Plan, Met Culture, and equity initiatives. So just looking ahead, we started work with the program units about 6 to 8 weeks ago, probably nearer to that eight-week mark, or potentially even a little bit earlier. Some of it is landed, but because we do our budget earlier in the year, there will be changes before the public comment period. Those changes should be minor, but I just wanted to call those out. We'll be taking a look at the financial forecasting for 2027 and beyond. Legislative outcomes will eventually incorporate additional funding from the session into our Q3 budget amendment and consider how that will impact our 2027 budget as well. Also, I'll mention this a little bit more in detail, but we always closely watch the federal budgets because that has a really significant impact on our Metro HRA program. Continuing to support work of council initiatives as those develop, and then as division work planning efforts evolve and develop over this year too, we'll consider those before our final budget at the end of the year. So this is just a visual of the upcoming committee schedules. So I am here in Q2 for the preliminary 2027 operating budget. In Q3, there'll be some updates shared as part of the broader council-wide budget updates that we bring to the committees. And then we'll start also here in the next month or two on the 2027 to 2032 capital programs. So the capital programs for parks and HRA. And I will be back here in September to deliver the presentation on the capital program. In Q4, we'll begin our division work planning, have some more information on HRA. And then in 2027, it all starts back over again into 2028. So just an ever evolving or an ever present cycle in our lives as we build budgets and then monitor them and then move on to developing the next year. So as I mentioned, we're still early in the process. Some of those changes that might take place are in the HRA operating and pass-through, livable communities pass-through, parks pass-through, as I mentioned with the session changes, and then any specific projects as well that may get identified. But this should be pretty close to landed. There shouldn't be any major changes. As far as next steps, me and my team will continue to monitor the federal funding, as I mentioned, continue stakeholder conversations, and then adjustments to the 2026 budget and what that does to 2027 as well. So transitioning into the preliminary 2027 budget. So the 2027 overview. So as always, we pay close attention to financial stewardship, being good stewards of the region's money, particularly with the property tax levy and how that is utilized, as well as identifying additional funding sources that we can utilize to advance our program. We continue to look at a multi-year budget, making sure that we're structured over time. And how we develop our budget is basically we start with our base budget, add on any federal or state requirements, any negotiated contracts that we have, and then the regional administration support costs. And as you know from various budget amendments, those can change throughout the year as additional costs are identified, and we need to adjust those up or downward. Just as a very high level, so the preliminary 2027 budget is $225.4 million. That is up $25.6 million compared with the amended budget for this year, which is currently at 199.8. And I'll talk a little bit more specifically about what that looks like. It's just under 13% increase. So here's where you can see the new data visualization that I worked on with Kristen and her team. So the federal funding is the biggest portion. That is the HUD pass-through funds for housing assistance payments. Of that $122.5 million, just shy of $110 million is the housing assistance payments. Another $9.7 million for HUD admin fees, and then the remaining is rounded out with both the EPA and the HUD Pro Housing grants. Those are a total about $3 million in this year's budget. For property taxes, we are at $45.6 million. Of that, the general purposes levy for CD and HRA, that is at $20.5 million. And then there's a $21 million for the LCA program. So that's money that we anticipate being spent in 2027 for the LCA program. And then the final amount is Parks debt service at $4.1 million. We are utilizing $25.9 million of reserves. That is actually the Livable Communities Pass levy. So what you're seeing here is that funds that have been levied for community grant programming, just a function of the cash flow. So we've got multi-year grants. This is when we anticipate those being spent. So you're seeing that there. In the state portion, that's $27.2 million. Of that, $12 million is Parks pass-through, and then another $14 million for the new Bring It Home program and HRA, and then $1.2 million in the Housing Trust Fund. And then there's a small line at the bottom you can see there, that's $3.2 million. That's the council-owned rental income. And then the other $1.1 million is some miscellaneous housing and HRA revenue, as well as investment earnings and fund transfers. And you can see that then feeds into the total budget of $225.5 million. So balanced with our expenses, which you will see here. So proportionally, this is very similar to what you've seen in other years. I'll dive into that a little bit more. We're going to do a little bit of a historic look back just to kind of see what overall what the division's growth has been over the past 5 years or so, as well as the individual departments within there. Metro HRA is the biggest consumer of dollars, and that is for administration or for the staff that run the program and the actual pass-through vouchers themselves. So Livable Communities is the staff costs as well as the pass-through program. Parks annual pass-through is about $19.2 million. Of that, just shy of $12 million is the Parks O&M program. The rest of that is staff and some consulting work. The RA allocation at $7.5 million. Again, that's the services that we pay for central services, so finance, general counsel, HR, and environmental services. Research programs, so that is $5 million. That is mostly staff salaries and then some modest support for consulting when we need to bring in outside expertise. Local planning assistance is at $5.1 million, the bulk of that being staff and support for the programs we need to operate. And then there is a $750,000 planned transfer for the 2026 planning grants. So I think I've mentioned in other, probably last year's budget presentation and then some various budget amendments where we've moved money over as we build to provide the financial support for the upcoming LPA grant program. And then finally, division management, $4.2 million. So that is some of the, like, I think Lisa's group is in there, and then some central services, one-time consulting budgets and things like that. And then transitioning to the uses. As you can see, most of our money goes out into the community as voucher payments to landlords, to the park's implementing agencies, and to the cities across the region that have been awarded Livable Communities grants. The rest of it is the majority of the rest of it is for operations, so work plan objectives, our general administrative costs, things like office supplies, travel. There's also some maintenance costs built in there for the council-owned housing. Those are for smaller items. The bigger items I'll talk about when I come back for the capital presentation. And then contracted services, so when we work with outside consultants. And this is one area where we really like to leverage our council DBE program where we can and support those smaller businesses as well. And then finally, we have the RA allocation and then debt service, so $4.3 million. And that is the principal and interest payments on Parks General bonds based on the post-sale repayment schedule. So the money that we levy in 2027 is for the next year's debt service payments. So just transitioning to some recent budget trends, I wanted to do just a little bit of a look back about and talk about kind of how CD has evolved over the last 5 years or so. We've had quite a bit of growth, both from a programmatic standpoint, what we've been able to accomplish, what we've been able to, the services we've been able to provide for the region, and then staff as well. So the total operating budget you can see there for 2027 is $222.5 million. This here includes all expenses, so operating pass-through and debt service. The overall change between 2022 and 2026 is $34.9 million. And this really does reflect the growth and service expansion across the division. And so I'll discuss a little bit more in detail later on what that has looked like. But kind of exciting to see the growth in CD, and having always had a balanced budget within this growth, and being able to leverage some outside financial support as well. So here are the total operating budget in additional detail. So these are the uses broken out by debt service, you can see there in the orange, operations in the dark blue, and pass-through in the light blue. Pass-through does account for roughly 80% of the annual totals, and 65% of our overall budget growth between the years shown there on the chart was additional pass-through dollars. So money going out into the region, which is exciting. And here we have operating budget by revenue source. So as I mentioned, the sources are consistent over time. One notable thing is that state funding has more than doubled. That includes some additional investment in parks and trails, which we've seen in some recent legislative sessions, including the community trees that we talked about earlier, as well as some modernization that you may have remembered earlier coming through, as well as the new Bring It Home program, which will be kicking off this year. So exciting for our folks in HRA and the additional vouchers that we'll be able to provide for folks in the region.
Heather, can I ask just on that side, so are the 2026 Bring Them Home dollars reflected in this, the additional vouchers?
They were in, Mr. Chair, committee members, they were in the 2026 budget, I believe, but we didn't execute anything on them. I think we're just doing them.
Just starting, yeah.
Just starting in 2027. I'd have to verify for sure.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
council members, I think we brought it in our second quarter budget amendment because we executed the contract earlier this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have dollars available to us now.
Yes, and so that should show, that should be reflecting, because it's like right under that 200,000. So it should be reflecting the amended budget. So yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, what slide am I on? Does that say 15? Okay, I think I got through that already. Okay, so here you can see operating costs by department. Growing over time, including some infusion of funding. I'll talk a little bit more that. I have them split out by their individual graphs in the next slide. So I'll transition to that here, but you can see here the different departments combined and kind of overlaid with each other. So this is the operating costs by department. You can see research, livable communities, regional parks and trails, and local planning assistance. I think a general trend as we worked towards developing and implementing Imagine 2050, bringing a lot of resources on board, staffing on board to do some of these new programs. So in research, qualitative climate and outcomes, the EPA grant is included in there, and then the 2025 land use inventory. For livable communities, the LCA redesign, and the HUD Pro housing grant. So the big jump there is really is because of the HUD Pro housing grant. In parks and trails, we had art and policy, the GIS improvement and the visitor study, and then in local planning assistance, providing assistance for Imagine 2050, and then some work with the American Indian Advisory Council. And I think you can kind of see the budget leveling off a little bit as we are now in sort of the implementation phase rather than building up to Imagine 2050. But I think interesting to show the different infusions of funding in both LCA and the HUD Pro housing. And just so you all know, there are no new FTEs in the CD budget this year. There are some in HRA, which I'll mention when I get to that slide to help implement the Bring It Home program. So yeah, transitioning to HRA, so 85% of the overall budget growth between 2025 and 2026 was additional pass-through dollars. That's roughly $33.5 million. The $16.2 million increase between last year and this year is nearly all pass-through for Bring It Home. And you can see that the operations have remained mostly flat or have modest increases to build staffing levels. It's also with the scale of the budget, those small, even adding, there have been FTEs added within those, but given the size of the budget, they're not as apparent in the chart here. But we will be adding 8 FTEs in 2027 to implement the Bring It Home program. So transitioning to talking about the regional goals, highlighting the current context and CD's work related to advancing those goals. So the first one here is leading on climate. So I know you may remember from earlier presentations, I would do an economic conditions section of the presentation. We've moved that here to sort of embed how those different conditions are showing up in our regional goals and what the current context is within the region. So here, just a couple quick highlights. I won't read through the goals, but Minnesota's economy and population have grown considerably since 2025, while gashouse emissions have declined. And following statewide trends, our regional greenhouse gas emissions have also declined since 2025. This is mostly due to a greater use of renewable energy sources in the electricity generation. That's kind of the main culprit for seeing that decline. And then transitioning into what CD's work has looked like. So both what we're doing to support the region as well as internal efforts. You'll see some of these are cross-listed between the various goals because they are applicable to them. But a lot of providing technical assistance to resources for local governments. So the greenhouse gas emissions reduction tool, the climate action toolkit, the climate vulnerability tool, as well as the community tree planting grants. And then some of our internal efforts have focused on implementing our climate action work plan, the environmental justice framework pilot, and then leveraging those federal funds that we were able to access. So kind of dabbling into the federal competitive grant landscape, which has allowed us to do some additional work, hire some additional folks, and do some exciting things that we may not otherwise be able to do with just our general fund support. And then moving on to protecting natural systems. So the 7-county region contains nearly 718,800 acres of regionally significant ecological areas. These areas include both land and water and account for just over 1/3 of the region's total acreage. So what this looks like, again, is providing tools for local governments to use. So the newly listed here are the natural systems mapping tool, community trees, again, you'll see Parks Implementing Agency work group support. So we're doing a lot of initiatives with the Parks Implementing Agencies on various strategies, including identifying new or more sustainable funding sources for them to leverage, and then regional parks and trail system additions. Internally, again, the climate action work plan, being able to provide tree canopy cover, so additional data sets there. The 2026 Regional Parks and Trails Visitor Study, which is both useful information for us to have and also feeds into our data inputs to provide or to determine the federal formulas the formulas for the funding within the region for the implementing agencies. Water monitoring projects with environmental services, and then our art and policy work as well. And then moving on to dynamic and resilient economy. So the 2025 unemployment rate was 3.9% in the metro, a middle of the pack result compared with peers. Area median income for a family of 4 in 2026 was $131,500, and new construction does continue to fall with just under 12,200 units permitted in 2025. What that looks like from a work perspective, again, local housing data tool, the housing policy toolkit, the Bring It Home program coming on board. Really excited again to assist with the planning assistance grants with the regional goal incentive. And then you saw here continuing to do work on the impacts of the Metro Surge research. You saw that presentation prior to this one, just kicking off that information and having more coming later in the year. So a really valuable tool, I think, to provide to the region. And then the Envisioning Growth Photo Lab, another initiative of the research group as well. Internally, we have the new grant management software implementation that has gone live. They are now in the process of kind of wrapping up the data migration for the old grants, and so that was a really big lift and something that we've had in our budget for a number of years that has continued to be, rolling forward, and we've finally been able to do that. So I think stepping into the next, even though we implemented the old system in this century, I feel like we're able to provide a much better service. I think we'll be able to provide better data and reporting for you all too on what the impacts of these grants have been as well. And then Housing Forward Cities, so hired 2 staff to implement those grants as well. And then moving on to healthy and safe communities. So about 85% of adults living in the Twin Cities Metro reported excellent or good health in 2023. It's higher than the national average, but the lowest reported share since 2011. Lower rates of food security and housing stability, among other negative health and economic outcomes, are anticipated but not yet known following the 42-day federal government shutdown in 2025 and early 2026. So we'll continue to see what how that plays out into this year and next, and what the needs are of the region and how we can support those moving forward. As far as our work has gone, I already mentioned the planning assistance grants for local governments. So we've infused quite a bit more money than we have had in past cycles. So really excited to do that, as well as providing some additional services that we haven't in the past either, for engineering services and things like that within those plans. The Bring It Home program, visitor study, and then on our internal efforts, again, art and policy, and then the parks youth and adult study as well. And then finally, equitable and inclusive. Immediately following the COVID-19 pandemic and recession, the Twin Cities Metro Black, Latina, and Asian communities showed higher employment and homeownership rates and wage growth. And more recent data suggests a reversal, however. Unemployment rates among Black, Latina, and Asian Minnesotans increased in both 2024 and 2025. And then as far as supporting the region, continuing the look at the impacts of the Metro Surge research, the American Indian Regional Park and Trail Place Names Toolkit. And then for our internal efforts, developing and piloting equity frameworks and updating the division's racial equity action plan. And that is the end of my slide.
Wow, thanks, Heather. That was a lot.
Yes, I kind of flew through it, so if there's any questions, let me know. I'll also advance here if there's any, I don't know if there are links that folks can click on, but anyway, if you need them, I can provide them. So this is where most of the data came from.
Yep, they're live.
That was in there, so.
Cool, yeah. Thanks. And thanks to you and to your team as well.
Yes.
For this work. Questions on that presentation? Yeah, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a lot of information here, but I'm having a hard time processing it because I'm used to, like, this is what 2026 was. This is the change in each thing to 2027. And a lot of times that would come in a memo, you know, to accompany the presentation, but the memo just basically says you're going to get a presentation. Right, and it would be nice to have more information in a written format. Okay. You know, not having to go watch the video again to see if I need to review anything.
Sure.
I miss that from how we used to have it. And because our funds are so segregated, it's hard to follow when you put them all together and then parse them all out again. So it'd be nice to know, like, general fund money is going where.
Okay. Yeah.
Is that making sense, Heather?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Mr. Chair, committee members, that's, I think, something that we can provide. I have the information. It's just, I'll have to formulate it to get it all.
But it used to be you could take last year's budget and put them side by side if you have to. But a lot of that stuff now gets erased because it's on the website, you know, and I hate paper, so I don't take all of those papers home.
Right.
You know, but what they tend to do on the website now is when there's a new budget, they put it on the budget page and the old one just stops being there after a year or two. So it's really hard to look at year over year.
Side by side, year by
trends.
year over year. Cool.
Yeah, I can definitely provide that.
Thanks for the suggestion, Councilmember Wolf. Anything else from the committee? When are you back here again with the next iteration?
Mr. Chair, committee members, I'll be back for the capital presentation September 21st, I believe. But then I think the council-wide budget, high-level budget and brief presentation, I believe is July 12th or thereabouts.
Okay. All right,
So that's when we'll do all of us up here together, kind of walking through things, so.
Anything from the director? Okay, cool. Anything else from the committee? Thanks, Heather. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank
We
you.
went through that. Anything from you, recording secretary? Okay.
I would just say that, reminder, our July 6th meeting
Right.
is canceled.
Our July 6th committee meeting is canceled. Thank you. And seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned.